I never imagined I would find myself standing at the gates of the lavish mansion, holding my daughter's hand, desperate for help. I had always lived a modest life, content with what I had, but nothing prepared me for the depths of despair I would feel in that moment. The family I had once considered friends had everything: money, power, influence. They lived in a mansion worth more than everything I owned combined. Their lives were perfect on the outside, but behind closed doors, they were something else entirely. My daughter, Lily, was diagnosed with a rare disease, one that required an expensive, life-saving treatment. I did everything I could to scrape together the money, but I fell short. So, when I found out that the very people who could help us, my best friend and her husband, were spending $250,000 on a wedding, I swallowed my pride. I made the call. I explained our situation. I asked for their help. Their response? Cold. Dismissive. They told me they couldn't afford to help. Our wedding is too important, they said. I was stunned. My daughter's life hung in the balance, and they were more concerned about flowers and extravagant decor. But what they didn't know was that I had a plan. I wasn't going to let them get away with this. Not when I knew that their happiness was built on lies. I would do whatever it took to make them realize that sometimes the most unexpected people can become your only hope. It all started so innocently, with a persistent cough that I initially brushed off as nothing more than a seasonal cold. Lily had always been the picture of health. She was only 7 years old, but had a zest for life that was contagious. She spent her afternoons running around the park with her friends, her laughter echoing through the air. As a mother, I couldn't have asked for more. My little girl was thriving, and so was I. Even though life was often a struggle, there was a sense of peace that came from knowing that she was happy and healthy. But then, her cough worsened. I tried giving her medicine, thinking it was just a lingering cold. When that didn't work, I took her to the pediatrician, thinking they'd send us home with some antibiotics, and we'd be back to our usual routine in no time. I wasn't prepared for what the doctor said. He was calm, collected, and professional, but I could hear the underlying concern in his voice when he told me they needed to run more tests. My heart dropped as he explained that Lily's condition wasn't typical. Her cough, her fatigue, and the persistent fever were signs of something far more serious. I tried to stay calm for her, to reassure her, but inside, I was crumbling. When we got home, Lily curled up on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, her bright eyes dimmed by the sickness she couldn't understand. I was the one who was supposed to protect her, to shield her from pain, yet here I was, helpless. Days later, the results came back, and the diagnosis was confirmed. Lily had a rare, life-threatening disease. The medical term sounded like something from a science fiction novel, but it was all too real. The disease could only be treated with an expensive, cutting-edge procedure that wasn't covered by insurance, and it wasn't available in just any hospital. It was a last-resort treatment, something that only a few specialized hospitals could provide. My stomach turned as the doctor outlined the costs. It was more than I could ever afford. The numbers blurred in my mind as he spoke, and I felt a knot form in my throat. This wasn't just a bad cold that could be treated with some over-the-counter medicine. This was life or death. The doctor explained that without the treatment, Lily wouldn't survive. I left the office in a daze, barely remembering how I got back to the car, my hands shaking as I held Lily's hand. Back at home, I sat down and stared at the hospital bills piling up on the kitchen counter. I was exhausted, mentally, physically, and emotionally. But I refused to give up on my daughter. I had to fight for her. But how? How could I possibly come up with the money needed to save her? I spent the next few days calling every hospital, researching every possible option, but nothing seemed viable. No one was willing to help. They all said the same thing. The treatment was too expensive, and it wasn't covered by insurance. I couldn't even get a loan for such a large amount. My heart sank every time I thought about the possibility of losing Lily. And then, as I was sitting in the quiet of our small living room, an idea came to me. A desperate one, but an idea nonetheless. I knew that there was someone who could help. Someone with the money and resources to make this happen. My best friend, Sarah, had everything. Her family was wealthy, well-connected, and could easily afford the treatment Lily needed. They were hosting a wedding, an extravagant event that would cost them more than most people made in a lifetime. I had never asked them for help before. I had always been independent, never wanting to burden anyone. But this wasn't just about me anymore. This was about my daughter's life. I couldn't stand by and do nothing. So I made the decision. I would ask them for help, even if it meant swallowing my pride and confronting the reality of what I had to do. I took a deep breath and picked up the phone, knowing that this call would change everything. It was my only chance. The moment I found out that Sarah and her husband, Ethan, were planning their wedding, I knew it was going to be extravagant. Sarah had always dreamed of a fairy tale wedding, one that would be talked about for years. Her family had the means to make that dream come true, and they were doing exactly that. I had seen their plans unfold over the course of months: the luxurious venue, the designer dresses, the top-tier caterers. It was everything I imagined it would be: lavish, sparkling, and perfect. But as I looked at the details of their wedding, I couldn't help but feel a deep, growing sense of resentment. A wedding costing over $250,000, and here I was, struggling to keep my daughter alive, unable to come up with the money to save her. It was a cruel irony that felt like a constant weight on my chest. How could they spend so much on a single day when my daughter's life hung in the balance? At first, I didn't know how to approach them. Asking for money was hard enough, but asking for help in such an intimate and urgent way felt impossible. I was their friend, their confidant, but I had always been independent. I didn't want to look weak, to appear as though I was depending on their charity. But the more I thought about it, the more desperate I became. Time was running out for Lily, and I knew I couldn't do this on my own. Sarah and I had been friends for years. We had shared countless memories together, from late-night talks about our hopes and dreams to laughter-filled weekends at each other's homes. Our friendship had always felt solid, like a bond that nothing could break. But now, I was faced with something that no friendship could prepare me for, asking for a favor that felt like it might tear everything apart. I told myself that I had to swallow my pride. I didn't have the luxury of waiting for a miracle. Lily needed this treatment, and if there was any chance that Sarah could help, I had to ask. The decision was agonizing. I spent nights awake, thinking about the right words to say, wondering if I could possibly make Sarah understand the urgency of the situation. Could I even ask her to do something that would change the course of her life so dramatically? Would she be able to comprehend the level of desperation I was feeling? I spent the next few days gathering my thoughts, rehearsing the conversation in my mind, and trying to figure out the best approach. The day I finally decided to make the call, my hands were trembling. I stood in the kitchen, staring at the phone, knowing that this moment would change everything. I couldn't afford to be subtle. I had to be direct, clear. Lily's life was at stake, and I couldn't afford to dance around the issue. I dialed Sarah's number, my heart pounding in my chest as I waited for the line to connect. She answered almost immediately, her voice full of excitement as she began talking about the wedding. "Sarah, I need to talk to you about something," I interrupted, my voice tight. "It's about Lily. She's really sick, and the doctors say she needs this treatment, but I can't afford it. I need your help. I don't know where else to turn." There was a silence on the other end. I could hear Sarah's breathing, slow and measured, but she didn't speak for what felt like an eternity. I knew she was processing what I had just said. Finally, she spoke, her voice cautious. "Of course, we want to help, but you know the wedding is coming up. We've already put so much into this. We're stretched thin, financially, with everything." My heart sank. Her words were like a slap, cold and dismissive. I wanted to scream, to tell her that my daughter's life was worth more than any wedding. But I stayed calm, biting back the tears that threatened to spill over. "I'm not asking for a handout, Sarah. I'm asking for help. Just please try to understand. Lily doesn't have time." There was another pause, longer this time. I could almost hear Sarah's thoughts as she weighed the situation, torn between her loyalty to me and the pressure of her upcoming wedding. "I don't know," she finally said. "We're spending so much on the wedding. Maybe you should try a GoFundMe or..." I'm sorry, but we just can't do it. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. They were cold, detached. There was no urgency in her voice. No sense of responsibility. I was crushed. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about a friendship that felt like it was slipping away, about the people I thought I could rely on letting me down at the moment when I needed them the most. My heart sank as I realized that this wasn't just about Lily's treatment. It was about whether or not I could even count on the people who were supposed to care about us. The days following my conversation with Sarah were some of the hardest I've ever endured. Lily's condition worsened every day. The coughing had become violent, the fever relentless. My little girl, the one who used to run around with so much energy, now lay curled up on the couch, her small body racked with pain. Each day felt like I was losing her piece by piece, and all I could do was watch helplessly. I spent every waking hour either researching treatment options or praying that somehow, some miracle would present itself. The phone calls I made to hospitals, the emails I sent, all felt like whispers in a vast void. Nobody could offer the help I needed, and I was running out of time. The phone call with Sarah continued to echo in my mind. I kept replaying her words over and over, trying to convince myself that I had misunderstood, that she didn't mean what she had said. But no matter how much I tried to justify her response, it was clear. She had chosen her wedding over my daughter's life. I knew I had to act. I had no more time to waste waiting for them to come around or change their minds. The treatment Lily needed wouldn't wait for anyone, least of all the people who had the power to make a difference. The decision had been made for me. I would have to fight for my daughter's life alone. But as desperate as I was, part of me still held on to the hope that somehow Sarah would come through for me. I couldn't believe that the woman I had called my best friend for years could be so cold, so detached, especially when it came to the life of a child. I picked up the phone again, my hands shaking as I dialed her number. This time I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to be apologetic. This wasn't about asking for a favor. It was about saving Lily's life, and nothing else mattered anymore. "Sarah, it's me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I don't know what else to do. Lily's getting worse, and the doctors said if we don't act now, she won't make it." I could hear her hesitation on the other end. She didn't respond immediately, and I felt the weight of her silence pressing down on me. "I told you, we can't afford this right now," she finally said, her voice flat and businesslike. "We've already put everything into the wedding. You need to understand, this is a huge investment for us." My stomach twisted. It felt like a slap in the face. Her words, so casual, so dismissive, left me breathless. I wanted to scream at her, to tell her that she didn't understand, that nothing, not the wedding, not the venue, not the dress, mattered if Lily wasn't here. "Sarah," I said, struggling to keep my voice from cracking, "you don't get it. You're talking about a wedding, a single day. But Lily's life is on the line. She needs this treatment. We can't afford it, and I don't know where else to turn. I thought you'd help. I thought you were my friend." Her silence stretched out again, suffocating me. I could hear the muffled sounds of people in the background, the chatter and laughter from her wedding planning. I could almost picture her in the middle of it all, surrounded by the luxury, the glittering world that she was so focused on. "I'm sorry," Sarah said finally, her tone now distant, almost robotic. "Maybe you should consider other options. We just can't do anything right now." The finality in her voice made my blood run cold. I could feel the walls closing in, and the realization hit me like a wave. The people I had trusted, the ones I had turned to for support, had failed me in the worst way possible. My best friend had chosen her wedding over my daughter's life, and I was powerless to change it. I hung up the phone, the weight of the conversation sinking into my bones. I wanted to throw the phone across the room, to scream in frustration, but I didn't. I couldn't. Not with Lily in the other room, waiting for me to be strong. She didn't deserve to see me fall apart. In that moment, I knew I had no choice but to take matters into my own hands. I could no longer rely on Sarah or anyone else. If Lily was going to survive, I would have to find a way to make it happen on my own. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that somehow I had been betrayed. I had spent years helping Sarah, being there for her in every way I could. And now, when I needed help the most, she had turned her back on me. After the call with Sarah, I felt like I was suffocating. The crushing weight of helplessness settled over me like a dark cloud, blocking out any remaining hope. I had always believed that the people closest to me, the ones I loved and trusted, would be there when it counted. But now, I was facing the reality that I was alone in this fight. And the worst part? It wasn't just the betrayal. It was the realization that Sarah, the person I thought of as my best friend, was willing to put something as trivial as a wedding over the life of a child. The days blurred into one another. I barely slept, barely ate. The thought of my daughter, her face pale with sickness, haunted me constantly. I tried to focus on her, on making her comfortable, but it was hard to mask the fear. Her condition was worsening. Her cough had become so violent that she could barely catch her breath. She'd cry in the middle of the night, reaching for me in panic as her chest heaved. How could I sit there, helpless, and watch my little girl suffer? I told myself that I would be strong for her, that I wouldn't let my fear show, that I would stay positive, keep pushing forward. But the truth was I was breaking. Every moment felt like a countdown to the point where it would be too late. And the worst part? I had no way of stopping it. The doctors had made it clear that without the treatment, there was nothing they could do. It was the only chance she had left. And I couldn't even get the money together to make it happen. I knew I couldn't keep relying on Sarah. I had to make a choice, a hard, painful choice. I couldn't sit by anymore. I needed to find a way to get the money. I would sell whatever I could. I would ask anyone I knew. But I couldn't let Lily's life slip away because of my pride or my fear. I spent the next few days trying every possible avenue. Crowdfunding, loans, reaching out to other friends, people I hadn't spoken to in years. Some ignored my messages, some offered sympathy, but no tangible help. The more I reached out, the more I felt the isolation pressing in. I couldn't believe this was happening. People I thought I could count on weren't coming through for me. Sarah, who I had been there for time and time again, had turned her back on me at the very moment when I needed help the most. One afternoon, I sat in the living room, scrolling through medical websites, trying to find an affordable option, when Lily shuffled into the room. Her cheeks were flushed, her body thinner than it had been just weeks before. She looked at me with tired eyes, her small hands clutching the stuffed animal I'd given her when she was a baby. "Mommy, why are you so sad?" she asked, her voice soft, almost too soft for a child her age. I smiled, but it was thin and broken. "I'm just worried about you, sweetheart. I'm going to make sure you get better, okay? You're going to be okay." She smiled back, but it didn't reach her eyes. Lily wasn't stupid. She knew something was wrong. She had always been so perceptive, so sensitive to the world around her. And even though I tried my best to shield her from the truth, I could see the fear in her eyes. "I'm scared, Mommy," she whispered. "Will I be okay?" I couldn't hold back the tears any longer. I scooped her up into my arms, kissing the top of her head, whispering promises I didn't know if I could keep. "I promise, Lily. I'll do whatever it takes to make sure you're okay. I'll find a way." But deep down, I wasn't sure I could. The odds felt so stacked against me, and I couldn't help but wonder if this was the part of life where things fell apart, no matter how hard you tried. Could I really save her? Or was I too late? In that moment, I realized something. My desperation wasn't just for the money or the treatment. It was for time. Time I couldn't get back, time that was slipping away. And all I had left was the fight to make sure I didn't lose my daughter without giving everything I had. I was running out of options. Every phone call, every attempt to ask for help had failed. I couldn't keep waiting for someone to step in and rescue me. Time was running out, and I had to act. Lily's condition was worsening with each passing day, and there was a feeling of inevitability creeping into my thoughts, the kind that comes when you realize you're losing a battle you didn't even know you were fighting. I had never imagined myself in this position. I had spent years trying to be strong, independent, doing everything in my power to make sure my daughter was safe and well taken care of. But now, as I sat in the quiet of the living room, watching Lily doze on the couch, I understood that sometimes, Life doesn't care about your pride or your determination. It doesn't wait for you to be ready. The pain in my chest was a constant reminder of how much I had failed. Not just as a mother, but as someone who had trusted the wrong people. The one person I had turned to for help, Sarah, had turned her back on me when I needed her the most. She had a choice: to help save a life, to do something meaningful, or to focus on her perfect, glittering wedding. And she had chosen the latter. But I couldn't give up. Not now. Not when Lily was still here, her little heart still beating, still holding on to hope that I would make it all right. The treatment Lily needed was a long shot, but it was the only one we had left. I couldn't just sit here and watch her slip away because I hadn't been willing to step outside my comfort zone. I needed a plan. A real one. And not just a plan to beg for help, but a plan to make them see the reality of the situation, that the wedding, the expensive venue, the lavish dress, it didn't matter. What mattered was Lily. It had to be made clear to Sarah and her husband, Ethan, that nothing they were doing could compare to the importance of saving my daughter's life. I had always been too proud to manipulate people, to use their weaknesses against them. But this was different. I wasn't asking for a handout. I was fighting for my child. If that meant getting my hands dirty playing their game, then I would do it. I spent the next several hours researching everything I could about Sarah and Ethan's wedding. I knew the venue they were using, the vendors they had booked, the contracts they had signed. I wasn't sure how much leverage I had, but I had to believe that I could find something, anything that could make them see reason. I thought back to the way Sarah had dismissed me, the way she had spoken to me as though my daughter's life was just another inconvenience. And then it hit me. Their wedding was built on an image. It was all about appearances, about what people thought of them, their status, their public persona. What if I used that against them? I made a list of everything I knew about their wedding, the vendors, the suppliers, the contracts they had signed. There had to be something. I was desperate, but I also knew that sometimes desperation gives you clarity. I began contacting people, gathering information, asking questions about contracts and legalities. I wasn't sure exactly how this would play out, but I was running out of time, and I had nothing left to lose. I couldn't let Sarah and Ethan's image stand in the way of saving Lily. I didn't want to go down this path, but I had to. Every second mattered now. And as I prepared for the confrontation that was to come, I couldn't help but feel a small flicker of hope. I wasn't asking for charity anymore. I was demanding what was rightfully ours, the chance to keep my daughter alive. And if Sarah and Ethan didn't see that, I would make them, whatever it took. The days after the call with Sarah were like a blur. I couldn't focus on anything except for the heavy, suffocating feeling in my chest. Lily's health was deteriorating fast. The pain in her eyes, the way she struggled to get out of bed in the mornings, the quiet tears she'd wipe away when she thought I wasn't looking, it all haunted me. I was losing her, and I felt powerless to stop it. I had reached out to every possible person I could think of, and each attempt had been met with disappointment or cold indifference. I was no longer asking for charity. I was fighting for my daughter's life. But the more I tried to get help, the more I realized just how alone I was in this battle. I knew I had to do something drastic. I couldn't keep waiting for people to come around, to change their minds. I had to make them understand. Make them see that Lily was more important than anything else, more important than weddings, more important than social status, more important than money. The truth was, I was tired of being the one who silently gave and gave, who never asked for anything in return. I had been a good friend to Sarah for years. I had helped her through personal crises, supported her when she needed it most. But now, when I needed her, when Lily needed her, she had turned her back on us. The worst part was the silence. The lack of response from Sarah, the emptiness in her words when she finally spoke to me, as if I were nothing more than a problem she didn't want to deal with. I had never felt so invisible in my life. All those years of friendship, of giving and supporting each other, seemed to mean nothing to her. The wedding, the expensive dress, the glittering reception, that was her priority. My daughter's life was an afterthought. And then there was Ethan. I had always known he was somewhat distant, a little aloof, but I had never imagined he could be so heartless. He knew how much Lily meant to me, how much she meant to Sarah, but he never once spoke up. It was like he was willing to let her die just to keep things smooth for the wedding. I knew I couldn't let that go. I couldn't sit back and allow my daughter's life to be used as a bargaining chip in some twisted game of appearances. I was no longer asking for their help. I was demanding it. I started doing my research, finding every detail I could about their wedding, the venue, the vendors, the contracts they had signed. They had built their world around perfection, around impressing others. But I had a feeling that they had made mistakes, overlooked something that could be their undoing. And if I found it, I would use it. I was no longer playing by the rules. I was tired of being the good friend, the understanding one. I was done waiting for people to do the right thing. If I had to force them into a corner to make them understand that Lily was more important than their image, then that's exactly what I would do. I spent the next several hours contacting everyone I could find who might have information about their wedding contracts. I wasn't sure exactly what I was looking for, but I knew that in a sea of contracts and legalities, there had to be something, a small crack in the facade, that would make them realize just how serious I was. By the time night fell, I had uncovered something. A detail, a small oversight in one of their contracts that, if exposed, would ruin their perfect wedding. It was nothing illegal, nothing too outrageous, but enough to make the whole thing crumble if it got out. For the first time in weeks, I felt a small glimmer of hope. I had the leverage. I wasn't just pleading anymore. I had something they needed. They had built their lives on an image, a perfect facade, and now I had the power to shatter it. I knew that using this against them wasn't the right thing to do, but I was out of options. My daughter was running out of time, and I wasn't going to let their selfishness stand in the way of saving her. Tomorrow I would confront them. It wouldn't be easy. It would be uncomfortable. But I wasn't asking anymore. I was demanding what was rightfully ours, the chance to save my daughter's life. The day of the confrontation arrived, and the weight of it hung over me like a dark storm cloud. My hands trembled as I prepared for what would be the hardest thing I'd ever do. The plan I had been working on for days had taken shape, and now I had no choice but to follow through. My daughter's life depended on it. I called Sarah and Ethan and told them I needed to speak to them in person. The words felt unnatural as I spoke them, but they were necessary. I couldn't afford to wait any longer. If they had any intention of helping, it was time for them to step up. If not, I would have to make them see just how serious this was. I arranged to meet them at their house, where they were finalizing the last details for their extravagant wedding. The thought of it sickened me. The lavish decorations, the glittering guest list, all while my daughter lay at home, her health deteriorating by the hour. But this wasn't about their wedding anymore. It was about something much more important. As I stood at the door, I could feel my heart racing, my throat tight with fear. I had never been the type of person to confront others like this, to demand something so personal and urgent. But this time, it was different. I was fighting for Lily's life, and nothing, not their wedding, not their pride, not their perfect image, would stand in my way. Ethan answered the door first, his face lit with a polite smile that faded when he saw the look in my eyes. He stepped aside and let me in without a word, and for a moment, the air between us was thick with tension. Sarah was sitting on the couch, going over wedding details with a coordinator on the phone, her voice light and breezy. But when she saw me, she instantly went silent. "I need to talk to both of you," I said, my voice steady, but filled with an emotion I couldn't hide. "This can't wait any longer." They exchanged looks, their faces unreadable, before Sarah set the phone down and gave me her full attention. She was still dressed in her wedding planning attire, crisp white blouse, perfectly styled hair, everything about her calm and composed, as if the world outside was just a blip in her perfect, curated existence. "I don't know what you're expecting from us, but we've already discussed this," Sarah said, her voice clipped, as if this was an inconvenience. I took a deep breath, fighting to keep my emotions in check. This wasn't just a plea for help. This was a demand. I wasn't asking anymore. My daughter's life was on the line. "Do you understand what's happening?" I asked, my voice firm, the words carrying a weight they couldn't ignore. "Lily's condition is getting worse. She needs that treatment, and we can't afford it. I've asked for your help because I thought you would help. I thought you would be there when it counted. But I've been left with nothing. Sarah's face softened for a moment, but it quickly hardened again as she crossed her arms. We're doing everything we can for you, but the wedding is a huge deal. We've put everything into it. I don't know what else you want me to do. Her words stung, and I could feel my anger rising. She wasn't listening. She didn't get it. None of it mattered. Not the wedding, not the flowers or the guest list. None of it could replace the life of a child. I pulled out a folder from my bag and laid it on the coffee table. Their eyes flicked down to it, confusion in their expressions. This was the moment I had been preparing for, the moment I would show them that I wasn't just asking for help anymore. I was going to make them see that their perfect world could be shattered if they didn't act. I've been doing some research, I said, my voice calm but carrying the weight of determination. And I found something. I opened the folder and slid the papers across the table toward them. This is a copy of the wedding contracts you signed. And this. I tapped the paper with my finger. This is a detail that could destroy your entire wedding if it gets out. Something you missed, something no one else knows about. They both looked at the papers, their expressions faltering for the first time. The facade was cracking, and they knew it. They had no idea that I had the power to expose their weaknesses, to reveal the truth about how much they cared about maintaining their perfect image. You can pretend all you want that this wedding is the most important thing in your life. I continued, my voice growing stronger. But you're wrong. What matters is Lily's life. And if you don't help her now, I will make sure everyone knows what you chose over her. The room fell silent. They exchanged glances, their pride now clearly slipping. I saw Sarah's shoulders slump, her composure faltering for the first time in years. Please, Sarah, I said softly. Help me save her. It's not too late. There was a long pause, the tension thick enough to cut through. But this time, when they spoke, it was different. They had no more excuses. No more defenses. We'll help, Ethan said finally, his voice strained, and I could see the weight of guilt settling on his face. The day of the wedding arrived, and I felt like I was holding my breath, waiting for the inevitable storm. The whirlwind of preparations, the fluttering of emotions, and the underlying tension that had been building for weeks had all led to this moment. I had gotten what I needed from Sarah and Ethan, the promise of financial help for Lily's treatment. But as the day unfolded, I couldn't shake the feeling that nothing would ever be the same again. I arrived at the wedding venue early, a luxury hotel overlooking the city, its polished glass and marble reflecting the perfect image they had worked so hard to create. There were flowers everywhere, white roses and peonies in perfect symmetry, chandeliers glittering above, the soft hum of classical music playing in the background. The kind of wedding that dreams were made of. Or, at least, the kind of wedding that Sarah had always dreamed of. As I walked into the venue, I couldn't help but notice the stark contrast between the world inside this luxurious space and the life I had at home. The bright lights, the expensive suits, the endless smiling faces. It all felt like a performance. A performance that had cost them everything. I stood in the back of the room, my eyes scanning the crowd, looking for Sarah and Ethan. They were surrounded by people, shaking hands, laughing, talking about the wedding details. For a moment, I felt like an intruder, like I didn't belong in a world so far removed from my own. But then I thought of Lily, lying at home, waiting for the treatment that would give her a chance at life, and I pushed the feeling aside. When the ceremony began, I couldn't help but watch Sarah as she walked down the aisle, her smile radiant, her dress an intricate masterpiece. She was the picture of perfection. But even as she moved gracefully toward Ethan, I couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal that clung to my chest. The world they had created was so beautiful on the outside, but at what cost? How many lives had been disregarded in favor of this perfect image? And then, as if the universe had a cruel sense of timing, I saw Lily's face flash before my eyes. The smile she used to wear, the sparkle in her eyes, the way she used to run around the house, full of life. And I thought about how, if it hadn't been for my confrontation, my plea, she wouldn't have had the chance to survive. The vows were spoken, the rings exchanged, and the applause that followed was deafening. The guests stood, clapping and cheering for the new couple, but I felt removed from it all. My thoughts were miles away, with Lily, with the battle I had fought to get here. As the reception continued, I moved through the crowd, trying to find a place where I could quietly reflect on what had transpired. I couldn't deny that Sarah and Ethan had helped me in the end. They had done the right thing, but they hadn't done it because they truly cared. They had done it out of necessity, out of fear of what might happen if I exposed the truth. I wasn't sure how I felt about that. But then, just as the night seemed to settle into the rhythm of polite conversation and laughter, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned, startled, to see Ethan standing there, looking somewhat uncomfortable. "I owe you an apology," he said, his voice low, his eyes avoiding mine. "For the way things went. We've been selfish. We didn't understand." He stopped, and for a moment, I saw a glimpse of the man I had once known. The man who wasn't driven by appearances, by the weight of his pride, but who cared enough to admit his faults. "You were right," he continued. "We were so caught up in this wedding, this perfect day, that we lost sight of what really mattered. And I know we can't undo what we did, but I'm sorry." I looked at him, unsure of what to say. This wasn't the apology I had expected, but it was an apology nonetheless. As the night wore on, Sarah approached me too. She didn't have the same humility as Ethan, but her voice carried a sincerity that caught me off guard. "I'm sorry for the way I treated you," she said. "For not understanding sooner. I was so focused on the wedding, on what others would think, that I didn't see what was really important." It wasn't much, but it was something. It was a crack in the facade they had built, one that couldn't be erased by a wedding or the perfect photographs. I nodded, unsure of how to respond. My emotions were still raw, the sting of betrayal fresh, but I also knew that this moment was a turning point. "I just want what's best for Lily," I said softly. "That's all that matters now." And in that moment, as the music played and the guests continued to celebrate, I realized something. Despite everything, the hurt, the betrayal, the way Sarah and Ethan had treated me, this wedding wasn't about them anymore. It wasn't about the money, the extravagance, or the social status. It was about me standing up for my daughter, and ultimately, it was about them learning the hard way that nothing is more important than family. I walked out of the ballroom, my step steady, knowing that I had done the right thing. The road ahead would still be tough, but tonight, I had reclaimed something for Lily. I had made sure she would have the chance to live. The reception had reached its peak, and the air was thick with celebration. Laughter echoed through the grand ballroom as guests clinked glasses and exchanged stories. The atmosphere was electric, but for some reason, I felt more detached from it all than ever before. The entire wedding, despite its extravagance, felt hollow. The beauty of the venue, the sparkling lights, the extravagant food, it all paled in comparison to the life I had been fighting to save. I couldn't shake the thoughts of Lily lying at home, waiting for the treatment that would give her a chance to survive. She was my priority, and the weight of that truth hung over me like a heavy shroud. I knew Sarah and Ethan had agreed to help, but it didn't erase the betrayal I felt. The wedding, in all its perfection, couldn't wash away the bitter taste of their cold dismissal. They hadn't helped out of compassion. They had helped because I had forced their hand. As the evening wore on, the speeches began, each person standing up to offer their congratulations to the newlyweds. The room was filled with polished words, anecdotes of their life together, and blessings for their future. But when it came time for Daniel, my son, to speak, something shifted. I hadn't seen Daniel much during the evening. He was busy with his groomsmen, his face a mixture of joy and nerves. He had seemed so distant at times, and I could feel a gulf between us that hadn't been there before. But now, as he walked up to the microphone, my heart leapt. The moment of truth had come. Would he stand with me, or would he continue to be swept up in the allure of perfection that had consumed Sarah and Ethan? He took the microphone in his hand, his eyes scanning the room. The laughter died down, and a hush fell over the guests. It was a moment everyone had been waiting for, but there was something different in Daniel's demeanor. He didn't seem to care about the crowd. He wasn't looking for approval or admiration. His gaze found mine in the crowd, and everything else faded into the background. "I want to thank everyone for being here tonight," he began, his voice steady but full of emotion. "But before we continue with the festivities, I need to say something important." The room grew silent, and I could feel the tension rising. I was unsure of what to expect, but something in his eyes told me that this wasn't going to be a typical wedding speech. "My mom," Daniel continued, his voice now stronger, "is the reason I'm standing here today. She's the reason I'm alive." I felt my breath catch in my throat. His words were a shock, but they were also a lifeline. The guests exchanged confused glances, but Daniel pressed on. "When I was young, my mom worked 2 jobs just to make sure I had food to eat, clothes to wear, and a roof over my head. She never asked for anything in return. She gave up everything so that I could have a future." Tears welled up in my eyes, and I struggled to hold them back. This was the moment I had been waiting for, the moment when my son would finally acknowledge the sacrifices I had made for him. The years of sleepless nights, of pushing through the impossible. For so long, I had been the silent caregiver, the one who quietly gave and gave until there was nothing left. But now, Daniel was speaking the truth I had longed to hear. "I've spent years learning about how the world works," he continued, "about wealth, status, and power. But what I learned from my mom was more valuable than any degree or career. She taught me that the only thing that truly matters is love and the strength to protect the people you care about." A lump formed in my throat, and I wiped my eyes. There was a deep sense of pride, mixed with relief, swelling in my chest. This wasn't the boy who had distanced himself from me in recent years. This was the child I had raised, the one who understood what truly mattered in life. "And I know some of you are wondering why this matters tonight," Daniel said, his gaze moving across the room. "But it does. Because my mom, the woman who sacrificed everything to give me a chance, is the reason I'm standing here today. And if I'm going to start my life with Victoria, I want to make sure that I never lose sight of what's really important." The room was silent, but this time it was different. The guests were still, processing what Daniel had just said. The impact of his words settled in, and I could see that they were finally beginning to understand. "My mom deserves more than just gratitude," Daniel concluded. "She deserves to be recognized, not just as the woman who gave birth to me, but as the woman who made me who I am today. And I'm proud to say that she'll always be my biggest hero." The silence that followed was deafening, and for a moment, I thought the world might stop turning. But then the applause began. Soft at first, then growing louder, until the entire room was clapping for me, for the woman who had fought for everything and everyone, even when it felt like no one was watching. Tears streamed down my face, but I didn't care anymore. My son had spoken, and he had spoken the truth. In that moment, nothing else mattered. I had spent years giving, but tonight, Daniel had given me something I had longed for: recognition. Not just as his mother, but as a person who had loved and fought with everything she had. The applause didn't last long, but it felt like it echoed in my ears forever. The sound of it was overwhelming, not because I wasn't used to attention, but because it wasn't what I had expected. I had expected judgment, a sense of discomfort in the room, maybe even resentment. But what I got instead was respect. A quiet, powerful acknowledgement of the sacrifices I had made. I wiped my eyes, feeling the weight of years of hidden struggles being lifted off my shoulders in that moment. It wasn't just the applause that moved me, it was the realization that Daniel had finally understood. He saw me, truly saw me, and he wasn't ashamed. He was proud of me. Sarah and Ethan remained silent, their expressions unreadable. I could feel the shift in the air. Something had changed between us. They had been so wrapped up in their own world, their own image, that they hadn't realized the cost of their priorities until it was too late. But now, here I was, standing in front of them with the truth laid bare. I wasn't the desperate mother they had once turned away. I wasn't the one begging for scraps. I was the woman who had raised a son, who could stand up for what was right, who understood that love wasn't about wealth or appearances, but about sacrifice and heart. The rest of the evening went by in a blur. People came to congratulate Daniel and Victoria, the couple glowing with the kind of excitement that only comes after such an emotional exchange. But the atmosphere had changed, and I knew it. I had made my point, not with anger, not with bitterness, but with truth. And truth had a way of cutting through the glossy veneer of their perfect world. As the night wore on, and the music continued to play, I found myself retreating to the corner of the room, my mind still spinning from the emotions of the day. I watched as Sarah and Ethan danced, as if nothing had changed, but I knew it had. I knew I had seen a crack in their perfect world, the kind of crack that would never fully close. A few minutes later, Daniel joined me. He walked over quietly, slipping his arm around me in a gentle embrace. I leaned into him, feeling a sense of peace settle over me. For the first time in a long time, I felt like everything was going to be okay. "I meant everything I said," Daniel whispered. "I know I've made mistakes, Mom, but I'm never going to forget what you've done for me. I won't let that go." I closed my eyes, letting the weight of his words wash over me. There was nothing else I needed to hear. In that moment, I understood that everything I had done, all the sacrifices, the heartache, the silent years, had led to this. It had led to this moment of recognition, of understanding, and of love. "Thank you, Daniel," I whispered back. "You're all I've ever needed." As the music played on, and the night wore into its final hours, I knew the journey ahead wouldn't be easy. There would still be challenges, still moments where I would doubt myself, still moments where I would feel the weight of the world on my shoulders. But for the first time, I didn't feel so alone, because I knew that no matter what, Daniel and I had each other. As I looked around at the room full of strangers, I realized something. None of their opinions mattered. What mattered was the love I had for my daughter, the fight I had fought, and the truth that had finally been heard. And as I watched Daniel and Victoria dance, surrounded by their family and friends, I knew that, for once, I had been seen. And that was all I needed.